The Dark Scrolls. Hello, my night owls, and welcome back to The Dark Scrolls. If you're new here, this is the corner of the internet where crowns come off, shadows get longer, and history stops pretending to be a fairy tale. Before we go further into tonight's story, tell me in the comments, what time is it where you are right now? What city or country are you watching from? I love seeing the night crew check in from all over the world, the 2 a.m. insomniacs, the early morning coffee people, the late shift survivors. If you want more history that doesn't romanticize the past, that shows the blood, the fear, the politics, and the people behind the pretty portraits, hit like, subscribe to The Dark Scrolls, and turn on notifications so you don't miss the next descent into the darker corners of history. Now, get comfortable. Turn the lights down. Maybe grab some water. Because tonight, we're going into the one place royal chronicles like to look away from. The bed where queens gave birth, and the rooms where they died. In 1539, Isabella of Portugal bled to death in her bed after giving birth to her 6th child, a stillborn son. Her husband, Charles V, the most powerful man in Europe, wept at her bedside. He never remarried, wore black for the rest of his life, mourned her until he died. But here's the thing they don't tell you. Charles is the one who kept getting her pregnant 6 times in 13 years. Even after the physicians warned him her body couldn't take it, even after she nearly died during the 5th pregnancy, he kept doing it because he needed heirs, needed backups, needed the dynasty secured. And Isabella? She died anyway. 35 years old, bled out while her husband watched, because that's what happened to queens who did their duty. She's screaming right now. Has been for 3 days straight. The sound echoes through stone corridors, makes servants cross themselves, sends ladies-in-waiting to the chapel. The sheets beneath her are soaked through with blood and sweat and amniotic fluid. The midwives huddle in the corner, whispering, which is never a good sign. They've seen this before. They know how it ends. Outside the birthing chamber, her husband paces, not asking how she is, asking whether it's a boy, whether the baby is healthy, whether the succession is secure. His wife is probably dying in the next room, and all he cares about is whether she's produced an heir before she goes. This is her 7th pregnancy in 9 years. She's 23 years old. If she survives, she'll be pregnant again within 6 months. And this isn't unusual. This is normal. This is what being a queen meant. Hey guys, tonight we're going deep into something they don't put in the fairy tales. The 8 queens, actually 10, because this story is bigger than 8, who were treated like royal breeding machines. Women whose entire value was measured in how many living sons they could produce before their bodies gave out. Women who spent their entire adult lives either pregnant, recovering from childbirth, or burying dead babies. Women who hemorrhaged, who got infections, who tore apart from the inside, who went through labor for days without anything for the pain except prayer. Go ahead and hit like if you're settling in for this one. Subscribe if you want history that doesn't romanticize the past or pretend queens had it easy just because they wore crowns. And drop a comment where you're watching from, what time it is. I love seeing the night crew show up from around the world. Now, get comfortable, turn down the lights, maybe grab some water because we're going to be here for a while. Tonight, we're diving into the medical horror, the political pressure, the physical destruction of royal motherhood, the lying-in chambers where women were sealed away for weeks in darkness, the childbed fever that killed more queens than assassins ever did. The stillbirths that were blamed on the mother's moral failings. The living children who died anyway, leaving their mothers to wonder what they'd done wrong. This isn't pretty. It's not meant to be. Because the truth about royal motherhood is that it was brutal, relentless, and often fatal. Let's start with Catherine of Aragon, because her story sets the template for everything that comes after. Catherine arrives in England in October 1501, 15 years old, doesn't speak English, just endured a nightmare voyage from Spain that left her seasick and terrified. But none of that matters because she has a job to do. She's been shipped across Europe to marry Arthur, Prince of Wales, heir to the English throne. Her body is the contract that seals the alliance between Spain and England. The wedding happens at St. Paul's Cathedral. Catherine wears white, unusual for the time, but she's making a statement. Virginity, purity, the unspoiled vessel ready to carry the future of two nations. Celebrations last for days. Henry VII spares no expense, because this marriage is about dynastic security, about making sure the Tudor claim, still relatively new, still shaky, gets bolstered by Spanish legitimacy. Catherine and Arthur are sent to Ludlow Castle. He's supposed to be learning to govern, she's supposed to be getting pregnant, except Arthur is sickly, always has been, thin, pale, coughs constantly. 5 months later, he's dead. Sweating sickness, probably, maybe tuberculosis, no one's really sure. Catherine is 16 years old, widowed, suddenly in an impossible position. She's a Spanish princess stranded in England. Her value as a political bride has just evaporated. Unless someone figures this out fast, Henry VII makes a new plan. Catherine will marry his other son, Henry, the spare, who wasn't supposed to be king, but now is. There's just one problem. Canon law says you can't marry your brother's widow. It's considered incest. Getting papal dispensation takes time and money and political maneuvering. While this is being negotiated, Catherine lives in limbo. She has almost no money. She's living in drafty residences with a shrinking household, writing desperate letters to her father, begging for help that never comes. Her status is unclear. Her future is uncertain. 7 years. 7 years of waiting. And then Henry VII dies, and his son takes the throne. Young Henry, now Henry VIII, makes marrying Catherine one of his first acts as king. She's 23, he's 17. Handsome, athletic, energetic, obsessed with proving himself. Everyone in England is relieved. The alliance is secured. All Catherine has to do is get pregnant and produce a son. She gets pregnant almost immediately. Prayers are said in every church. The court celebrates. Preparations are made. Catherine goes into her lying-in period, the mandatory isolation in the final weeks, sealed into darkened chambers with only her ladies and midwives, cut off from the outside world, waiting. January 1510. Labor lasts hours. Catherine screams and prays and bleeds. The midwives give her herbal drinks that mostly just make her vomit. They tell her to push. They tell her to pray. They tell her it'll be over soon. The baby is born dead. Her daughter stillborn. Probably the cord wrapped around her neck, or maybe she'd been dead for days and Catherine's body just hadn't realized. No one records the baby's name because there's no point. She's not a living son. She doesn't count. They wrap the tiny body in linen and bury her quickly somewhere on the grounds. No marker, no ceremony. Catherine is devastated. Physical agony from the birth, tearing, bleeding, exhausted, and emotionally shattered because she's failed. First pregnancy, first chance to prove her worth, and she's produced a dead daughter. The court whispers, maybe she's cursed, maybe God is displeased, maybe the marriage to Arthur's brother was wrong after all. But there's no time to grieve. Catherine needs to get pregnant again, fast. Within months of the stillbirth, she's expected to resume marital relations, expected to try again, expected to pretend the dead baby never happened. She gets pregnant again by September, less than a year after the stillbirth. This time she's more careful, more prayerful, more desperate. She makes pilgrimages, donates to churches, consults physicians about diet and habits, does everything she's supposed to do. New Year's Day 1511, Catherine gives birth to a son, healthy, screaming, living baby boy named Henry after his father. England erupts, bonfires, bells, tournaments. The king has his heir. Henry VIII is ecstatic. He holds his son, shows him off, commissions paintings and poems celebrating the birth. Catherine has done it, produced the son, secured her position. She can finally breathe. The baby dies 7 weeks later. No warning, no signs of illness. He just stops breathing one night. Maybe respiratory infection. Maybe sudden infant death. Maybe something no one understood, because infant mortality is so common, physicians don't even study it. 1 in 3 babies don't make it past their first birthday. Royal blood doesn't protect you. But this isn't just any baby. This is the heir to England, the son who was supposed to secure the Tudor dynasty, the baby who had his own household, his own staff, his own apartments. Catherine is destroyed, not just emotionally, though she's absolutely shattered, but politically. She's proven she can get pregnant, carry to term, give birth to a living son, but she can't keep him alive. And that's somehow worse than never producing an heir at all. Henry buries his son at Westminster Abbey. Catherine isn't allowed to attend the funeral. Women don't go to funerals, so she grieves alone, while her dead son is laid to rest without her. And then she's expected to get pregnant again. 25 years old, married 2 years, 2 pregnancies, 1 stillborn daughter never named, 1 son who lived 7 weeks and died for no reason anyone can explain. The pressure is crushing. Pregnant in 1513, miscarries. The baby comes too early, barely formed, more blood clot than child. She's alone when it happens, cramping and bleeding in her chambers. No one talks about this miscarriage. It doesn't get recorded in official chronicles. It's not a real loss, because the baby was never viable, so why acknowledge it? Pregnant again in 1514. Makes it further this time, feels movement, starts to believe maybe this one will survive. Goes into labor in November. The baby is a boy, premature but breathing. So tiny, the midwives aren't sure he'll make it through the night. They baptize him immediately. Emergency baptisms for babies who might not survive long enough for a proper ceremony. His name is recorded as Henry, same as his dead brother. He lives for a few hours, maybe 6, maybe 8, long enough to be held, to be christened, and then he stops breathing. Another dead son, another failure. The records are sparse because no one wants to dwell on it. Another dead boy, another crushed hope. The court whispers more openly now. Maybe Catherine can't do this. Maybe she's not meant to have sons. Maybe the marriage really is cursed. 29 years old, 4 pregnancies, 1 stillborn daughter, 1 son who lived 7 weeks, 1 early miscarriage, 1 son who lived less than a day, 0 surviving children. Pregnant again in 1515. This one ends in either miscarriage or stillbirth. The records aren't clear because by this point, even the chroniclers are tired of recording Catherine's failed pregnancies. Same story over and over. Pregnant, hopeful, labour, death. Why keep writing it down? And then, in 1516, something changes. Catherine carries to term. The baby is born healthy, screaming, alive. February 18th, a daughter, Mary. Princess Mary. She lives, she thrives, she survives infancy, survives her first year, survives the diseases that kill so many children. Catherine finally has a living child. But here's the problem. It's a girl. Mary is celebrated, loved. Henry adores his daughter. But Mary isn't enough. England needs a male heir. The Tudor dynasty is too new, too fragile. There's never been a ruling queen of England. No one believes a woman can inherit without triggering civil war. So Catherine's job isn't done. She needs to produce a son. Pregnant again in 1518. 33 years old, 7th pregnancy, 9 years of marriage, 1 surviving daughter, and 5 dead children behind her. This pregnancy is difficult from the start. She's exhausted. Her body is worn down from the constant cycle. She's not young anymore by the standards of the time. 33 is middle-aged. She goes into labour in November. The baby is another girl, born prematurely. Lives for a few hours, maybe less. Another emergency baptism. Another name barely recorded. Another daughter who wasn't a son, who wasn't healthy enough to survive. Catherine never fully recovers from this birth. Something tears during labour, or maybe infection sets in. Or maybe her body just finally says, enough. She's sick for months afterward, feverish, weak, bleeding more than she should. The physicians give her tonics and leeches and prayers. Nothing helps. She might have been pregnant one more time in 1519. Records are unclear. If she was, it ended early, just bleeding and cramping, and another failure no one wants to talk about. By 1525, Catherine hasn't been pregnant in years. She's 40. Her periods have stopped or become irregular. She's in constant pain from whatever damage the repeated pregnancies did. And Henry is done waiting. He's convinced she'll never give him a son. Convinced God is punishing him for marrying his brother's widow. Never mind that he's the one who pushed for the marriage, swore for years it was valid and blessed. Now, suddenly, it's wrong. Now, suddenly, he needs a new wife. Anne Boleyn. Young, flirtatious, clever enough to refuse to be his mistress, to hold out for marriage. Henry is obsessed. He wants her. He wants the possibility of sons she represents. He wants to start over with a woman whose body isn't destroyed. He demands an annulment, claims the marriage was never valid. Catherine fights back, refuses to accept it, refuses to step aside, insists she's Henry's true wife, that Mary is his legitimate heir. The fight drags on for 6 years, and finally, in 1533, Henry just does it anyway. Marries Anne in secret, breaks with Rome, declares himself supreme head of the Church of England, so he doesn't need the Pope's permission. Catherine is stripped of her title, no longer queen. Princess Dowager, Arthur's widow, as if her marriage to Henry never happened. Forbidden from seeing Mary, exiled from court, moved from residence to residence, her household shrinking, her income cut, treated like a prisoner in everything but name. She lives like this for 3 years, isolated, sick, heartbroken, writing letters to Mary that are intercepted. Her health continues to decline. She's in constant pain, can barely eat, probably dying of cancer. Catherine of Aragon dies on January 7th, 1536, 50 years old, in England for 35 years, married to Henry for 24. At least 6 documented pregnancies, possibly more. 1 surviving daughter, 5 dead children, and she dies alone in a cold castle. Forbidden from seeing her daughter, stripped of her title, erased as if those 24 years never happened. The moment her body couldn't produce what her husband wanted, she was discarded, thrown away like a broken tool. And Henry already moved on, already married to Anne, already expecting Anne to give him what Catherine couldn't. Except Anne Boleyn is about to learn the same lesson, that being young and beautiful and clever doesn't protect you, that your body is a political tool, and if it fails to perform, you're disposable. Anne thinks she's different. She spent years watching Catherine fail. She knows what not to do. She knows she needs to produce a son quickly. She's confident. She has to be. She just blew up the entire English religious establishment to marry this man. Pregnant almost immediately after the secret wedding in January 1533. Henry is thrilled, so certain it's a boy that he has announcements pre-written with "Prince" already filled in. Astrologers assure him. Physicians say it's definitely a boy based on how she's carrying. September 7th, 1533. Anne goes into labour at Greenwich Palace. Long, but not unusually so. Painful, but manageable. She's young, healthy, strong. The birth goes smoothly. The baby is born healthy, screaming, perfect. It's a girl. Henry's disappointment is crushing and immediate. He barely looks at the baby, doesn't attend the christening with enthusiasm. Celebrations are muted. Everyone can feel his frustration, his anger, his sense of being cheated. He'd broken with Rome for this, and she's given him another daughter. But fine, Elizabeth is healthy, legitimate. The next one will be a boy. Anne gets pregnant again in 1534. She's careful, watches her diet, rests, prays constantly, does everything the physicians tell her. Around 4 months in, she starts bleeding, cramping. The baby comes too early. A boy, dead, not fully formed but recognizably male. The son Henry wanted, born too soon to survive. Anne is devastated. And this isn't just grief. This is fear. She's seen what happened to Catherine. She knows what Henry does to wives who can't give him sons. Her position is suddenly precarious. Henry is cold after this, distant, already looking at other women, already wondering if maybe Anne isn't the answer either. Pregnant again in early 1536, desperate now. This has to be the one. This has to be the son. Henry is barely speaking to her. The court is full of whispers. She's terrified. January 1536. Henry has a jousting accident. Thrown from his horse, unconscious for hours. When Anne hears the news, the terror that he's going to die sends her into shock. The stress triggers something. She starts bleeding. Only about 4 months pregnant, but the baby comes anyway. Too early. Dead. It's a boy again. Another dead son. Henry sees the body, sees it was a boy, sees that Anne was carrying his heir and lost it, and something breaks in him. Maybe it was already broken. Maybe he was already looking for an excuse. But this is it. Within 3 months, Anne is arrested. The charges are absurd. Adultery with multiple men, including her own brother. Treason, plotting to kill the king. None of it is true. Everyone knows none of it is true. But Henry wants her gone, and he's the king. Anne is tried, found guilty, sentenced to death. She's given one small mercy, beheading instead of burning, a skilled swordsman from France instead of the usual clumsy executioner with an axe. May 19th, 1536. Anne Boleyn kneels on a scaffold at the Tower of London. 29 years old, married to Henry for 3 years, 4 pregnancies, 1 living daughter, 3 dead babies, about to die because her body failed to produce a male heir. The swordsman is good. 1 clean stroke, and she barely has time to finish her prayer before her head is separated from her body. They don't even have a proper coffin ready. They put her body in an old arrow chest and bury her in the chapel inside the tower. No ceremony, no marker. Henry marries Jane Seymour 11 days later. 11 days. That's how long he waits between executing his second wife and marrying his third. Jane is everything Anne wasn't. Quiet, obedient, conventional. No sharp tongue, no political maneuvering, no ambition. Just a well-born woman who'll do as she's told. Jane gets pregnant in early 1537. Henry is cautiously optimistic, but wary. He's been disappointed too many times. He doesn't celebrate. He just waits. The pregnancy progresses normally. Jane is healthy, follows every instruction, spends the final weeks in her lying-in chamber, isolated, waiting. October 12th, 1537. Labor begins, and it's brutal. Lasts for days. Jane is in agony, screaming, begging for help, for anything to make it stop. The midwives try everything. Herbs, prayers, positioning changes. Nothing helps. The baby won't come. Jane is exhausted, barely conscious. The physicians start talking about what to do if both she and the baby die. They ask Henry what he wants them to prioritize. Henry doesn't hesitate. Save the baby. The baby is what matters. Jane can die as long as the child survives. After 3 days of labor, the baby finally comes. A boy, healthy, screaming, perfect. Edward, the son Henry has been waiting for 28 years. The heir who'll secure the Tudor dynasty. England erupts. Bells ring. Bonfires are lit. Prayers of thanksgiving in every church. Jane survives the birth. Barely. She's torn apart, bleeding heavily, exhausted. But she's alive. She's done her duty. 12 days later, Jane develops a fever. Childbed fever. The infection that kills more new mothers than anything else. She's shivering, delirious, in agony. The physicians try bleeding, herbs, prayers. Nothing works. The infection is in her blood. Jane Seymour dies on October 24th, 1537, 28 years old, married to Henry for 18 months, 1 pregnancy, 1 son, dead, killed by the birth that finally gave Henry what he wanted. Henry mourns Jane, really mourns her. Years later, he'll say she was his true wife. He'll be buried next to her when he dies. But here's the thing. Jane died because Henry needed a son more than he needed her alive. When the physicians asked who to save, he chose the baby. He'd have let Jane die on the operating table if it meant Edward survived. That's what royal motherhood meant. Your life was worth less than your child's. Now, let's talk about what was happening in France, because Anne of Austria's story is somehow worse in a slower, more psychological way. Anne is born in 1601, daughter of Philip III of Spain. Just a girl playing with dolls while diplomats argue over her womb. In 1615, when she's 14, she's married to Louis XIII of France. He's 13. They're children, actual children. But Europe needs alliances, and their bodies are the contract. The wedding is lavish. Celebrations last for weeks. Everyone expects them to consummate the marriage immediately. You have witnesses. You put the children in bed together. You wait outside the door. You check the sheets in the morning for blood. Except Louis doesn't consummate the marriage. He's 13, terrified, possibly not even physically capable yet. So the wedding night passes and nothing happens. Days pass, weeks, months, nothing. Louis doesn't touch Anne, doesn't even seem interested. He spends his time with male favorites, hunting, playing soldier, anything except being alone with his wife. Anne is isolated, doesn't speak French well, has no friends, and her husband won't even look at her. Years pass, 4 years. Anne is 18 and still a virgin. Her marriage is unconsummated, which means it's not even valid. It could be annulled. She could be sent home in disgrace. The Spanish court is furious. The French court is embarrassed. Anne is humiliated. Everyone knows. Everyone is talking about the Virgin Queen who can't get her own husband to sleep with her. There are rumors. Some say Louis is impotent. Some say he's in love with men. Some say he's just terrified of sex. Whatever the reason, the result is the same. Anne's job is to produce heirs, and she's not even being given the opportunity. Finally, in 1619, after 4 years, Louis's advisors essentially force him to consummate the marriage. They bring in physicians to check that it actually happened. They need heirs. Anne gets pregnant almost immediately. Finally, after 4 years of waiting and humiliation, finally she can do her job. She's so relieved she could weep. This will fix everything. This will prove she's not barren. She miscarries, just starts bleeding one day and the baby is gone. Maybe 2 months into the pregnancy, maybe 3. Records are vague because everyone is so disappointed they don't want to dwell on it. Pregnant again, miscarries again and again and again. Between 1619 and 1631, Anne has at least 4 documented miscarriages. Some historians think there were more, failed pregnancies early enough they weren't officially recorded. Just Anne bleeding and cramping while the court whispers that maybe she's cursed. The pressure is immense. Every month Anne doesn't get her period is cause for celebration, and then the bleeding starts and everyone's hopes crash. Court physicians examine her, ask invasive questions, prescribe ridiculous treatments, bloodletting, special diets, herbal concoctions that make her vomit, prayers to specific saints. None of it works. France needs an heir. Anne is failing. By 1630, she's been married 15 years with nothing to show except a string of miscarriages and constant humiliation. She's 30 years old in the 17th century. That's old for a woman who hasn't had children. People talk openly about annulment, about Louis taking a new wife. And then something changes in 1638. Anne gets pregnant again, and this time, miraculously, she doesn't miscarry. The pregnancy progresses normally. She feels the baby move. She makes it through the dangerous early months. She carries to term. The entire French court is holding its breath. This could still go wrong. The baby could be stillborn, could die during labor, could be born alive but die hours or days later. Nothing is certain. September 5th, 1638. Anne goes into labor at the Château de Saint-Germain. The labor is long but not unusual, and then the baby is born. A boy. Healthy, screaming, perfect. Louis Dieudonné. Louis the God-given, the miracle baby who's going to be Louis XIV. France erupts in celebration. After 23 years of marriage, after at least 4 miscarriages, after decades of humiliation and failure and blame, Anne has finally produced an heir. Te Deums sung in Notre Dame, bonfires across Paris, poems written, paintings commissioned. 2 years later, another son, Philippe. 2 boys, succession secured. But here's what no one talks about. Those 23 years didn't just disappear. Anne spent her entire youth trapped in a marriage that humiliated her. Every miscarriage was public. Every failed pregnancy was discussed in council meetings, analyzed by physicians, blamed on her constitution, her piety, her sins. Her body was a national obsession. She wasn't a person, she was a vessel that kept failing. And here's something that should shock you, but probably won't. Anne of Austria is considered one of the lucky ones, because at least her children survived. At least she lived long enough to wield political power as regent. At least her story has something approaching a happy ending. Most queens weren't that lucky. Anne lives until 1666, 64 years old, having outlived Louis XIII and served as regent for her son. She wields significant political power in her later years, but those decades of failed pregnancies marked her forever. The psychological toll of spending your entire youth being told you're failing at your only job doesn't just go away. While Anne is suffering through miscarriage after miscarriage, Maria Theresa of Spain is born, Philip IV's daughter. In 1660, when she's 21, she's married off to Louis XIV, Anne of Austria's miracle baby, the boy born after decades of failure. Maria Theresa's marriage is another political alliance. Spain and France bound through her womb. Same story repeating across generations. Women shipped between countries, their bodies turned into contracts. The wedding happens in June 1660. Spectacular celebrations. Maria Theresa arrives not speaking much French, nervous, young, expected to immediately start producing heirs. Pregnant almost immediately. July 1661, she gives birth to Louis, le Grand Dauphin. Healthy boy, France is thrilled, succession secured. But Maria Theresa doesn't stop. Can't stop because the dynasty needs backups. Royal children die all the time. Another daughter in 1662, Marie-Thérèse, born healthy, survives infancy. Maria Theresa has 2 living children. She's doing well. Except Marie-Thérèse gets sick when she's 4, some childhood illness, develops a fever, struggles to breathe. Within days, she's dead. Pregnant again in 1664, another daughter, Anne Elizabeth, born healthy, seems strong. Maria Theresa is more protective, more watchful, terrified this baby will die too. Anne Elizabeth makes it past infancy. First birthday, second, third, fourth, and then she gets sick. Another childhood illness, another fever, another dead child. Anne Elizabeth dies at 4 years old, just like her older sister. Wait, let me say that again. Both of Maria Theresa's daughters died at exactly 4 years old. Same age, different years. Different illnesses, probably, but the same age. As if there was a curse. As if 4 years was all she was allowed to keep them. Maria Teresa is starting to understand something every royal mother learns. Having babies survive birth isn't enough. You have to keep them alive. And that's the part you can't control. Pregnant again in 1667. Another daughter, Marie-Anne, sickly from the start, weak, struggling. The physicians shake their heads. Marie-Anne doesn't even make it to her first birthday. 3 daughters, 3 dead. Maria Teresa is constantly pregnant, constantly grieving, constantly terrified. Pregnant again in 1668. Another son, Philippe Charles, a brother for Louis, another male heir, a spare. Philippe Charles is healthy, survives infancy. First birthday, second, third, fourth. Maria Teresa is starting to believe maybe this one will survive. Maybe the curse only affects her daughters. Philippe Charles dies when he's 5 years old. Another childhood illness, another fever. Married 11 years, 5 pregnancies, 5 births, 4 dead children, 1 surviving son. 33 years old, and her body is already breaking down from the constant cycle of pregnancy, birth, grief, pregnancy. Exhausted, chronically ill, in pain from whatever damage the repeated pregnancies have done. But she's expected to keep trying because, yes, she has 1 living son, but what if something happens to him? France needs security. Pregnant again in 1672, terrified. Doesn't want to do this anymore. Doesn't want to spend 9 months hoping only to lose the baby. But she doesn't have a choice. She goes into labor in October. The labor is difficult. Something is wrong. The baby won't come. Maria Teresa is in agony, screaming, begging. The midwives and physicians do what they can, but it's not enough. After hours of labor, the baby finally comes. Stillborn, a boy, dead before he even took his first breath. 34 years old, 6 pregnancies, 5 dead children, 1 living son. Her health is ruined, sick constantly, weak, feverish, chronic infections that won't heal. She's aged decades in just a few years. Looks old, worn out, used up. Louis XIV is disappointed but not surprised. Already emotionally detached. Has mistresses openly, blatantly. The most famous is Madame de Montespan, who has several of his children. Louis doesn't even pretend to be faithful. He's the king. He can do whatever he wants. Maria Teresa has given him his heir. That's all he really needed. Maria Teresa dies in 1683 at 44. Official cause listed as an abscess under her arm, probably blood poisoning. But really, she died from exhaustion. From her body finally giving up after years of being pregnant, giving birth, grieving, being pregnant again. 23 years married to Louis, at least 6 pregnancies, 1 surviving son. And when she dies, Louis mourns briefly and then marries his mistress in a secret ceremony. No more pregnancies required. He'd gotten what he needed from Maria Teresa, a legitimate heir. After that, he could afford to marry for companionship. But Maria Teresa never got that option. She was a queen, a vessel, a womb. And when her body couldn't keep up, she died young, worn out, used up. Charlotte of Mecklenburg-Strelitz has a different story, but it's not better. Born in 1744 into a minor German duchy, not particularly wealthy, not particularly important. And then in 1761, when she's 17, she's chosen to marry King George III of England. She doesn't know him, has never met him, doesn't speak English, but she arrives on September 8th, 1761. The wedding happens that same day. She's crowned the next day. One day, she's a German princess. The next, she's Queen of England, and she doesn't even speak the language. But Charlotte is smart, learns English quickly, adapts, makes friends. George actually likes her, which is more than most royal couples can say. He's faithful to her, which is almost unheard of for a king. They develop something approaching a real partnership. Within a year, Charlotte is pregnant. August 1762, she gives birth to George, the Prince of Wales, future George IV. Healthy boy. England is pleased, succession secured. But George wants a large family, multiple sons, security. So, Charlotte gets pregnant again, and again, and again. Between 1762 and 1783, Charlotte gives birth to 15 children. 15. That's 15 pregnancies in 21 years. Essentially, 2 full decades of being pregnant. Every year or two giving birth, every year or two recovering, and then getting pregnant again almost immediately. Let's break down what that actually means. 15 times her body was stretched. 15 times she went through labor. 15 times she risked hemorrhaging, infection, death. 15 times she had to recover, only to get pregnant again before her body had fully healed. The first few pregnancies are relatively easy. Charlotte is young, healthy, strong, recovers quickly. Babies are healthy. But by the 5th, 6th, 7th pregnancy, things get harder. Her body doesn't bounce back as quickly. Labors get longer. Recovery periods stretch out. She develops complications, hemorrhoids, varicose veins, chronic back pain. By the 10th pregnancy, Charlotte is in her early 30s, and her body is showing serious wear. Her spine starts to curve from the constant weight. Respiratory problems, possibly from organs being compressed by an expanding uterus over and over. Chronic pain. The physicians give her laudanum, which helps, but leaves her foggy and dependent. And she keeps getting pregnant. 11th, 12th, 13th. By this point, she's in her late 30s. Each pregnancy more dangerous than the last. Each labor harder. Each recovery takes longer. The physicians warn George that continued pregnancies could kill her. George doesn't stop. He wants more children, wants to make sure the succession is secure, wants backups for his backups. 14th child, 15th child. Charlotte is 40 when she gives birth to her last child, Princess Amelia, in 1783. 21 years of almost constant pregnancy have destroyed her health. Spine severely curved, chronic respiratory issues, constant pain. She looks decades older than she is. But here's the thing. By the metrics that matter to the monarchy, Charlotte is a massive success. All 15 children born alive. 13 survive to adulthood. Multiple sons, multiple daughters, a whole dynasty's worth. Succession secure multiple times over. The cost is her body. By her 40s, Charlotte can barely walk without pain. Breathing is labored. She's stooped from spinal curvature. She suffers from what's probably uterine prolapse, where the uterus drops into the vaginal canal from being overstretched too many times. The physicians can't do anything. They just tell her to rest, which is impossible because she's still queen, still has duties. And here's something that should make you pause. George III wanted Charlotte to keep getting pregnant even after the 15th child. When Amelia was born, he reportedly said he hoped for more. Charlotte was 40 years old. her body destroyed, barely able to walk, and her husband still wanted more children from her. Charlotte lives until 1818, 74 years old, when she dies. That's quite long for the time, but those final 3 decades are marked by chronic illness and pain. Her body never recovered from 2 decades of constant pregnancy. 15 children, 15 times stretched and torn and reshaped, 15 times risking her life. She survived all of it. But survival doesn't mean she came through unscathed. Charlotte's story gets painted as a success, and in one sense it is. But success doesn't mean it wasn't brutal. Even when royal pregnancy went well, the physical toll was catastrophic. Isabella of Portugal has a different kind of tragedy. Born in 1503, daughter of King Manuel I of Portugal, she's raised knowing she'll be married off. But she gets lucky in one sense. She marries someone who actually loves her, Charles V, Holy Roman Emperor. They marry in 1526, when she's 23. And unlike most royal marriages, this one is genuinely happy. Charles and Isabella love each other. They're partners, friends, lovers. They write letters when apart, make each other laugh, which makes what happens next even more tragic. Because love doesn't protect you. Affection doesn't make pregnancy safer. Being cherished doesn't mean he won't keep getting you pregnant until your body gives out. Pregnant in early 1527, she gives birth to Philip in May. Healthy boy who'll grow up to be Philip II of Spain. Spain celebrates. Charles is thrilled, both as emperor and as a husband who loves his wife and is happy she survived. But they don't stop. Charles wants more children, wants to secure the succession, wants backups. Pregnant again in 1528, another daughter, Maria, born healthy, 2 living children. Pregnant again in 1530. This pregnancy is harder. She's tired. Her body hasn't fully recovered. They've only been married 4 years. 3rd pregnancy. She carries to term, but the baby is born weak. Another daughter who dies shortly after birth. Maybe hours, maybe days. Not long enough to get a proper name recorded. Isabella is devastated. First real failure. First dead child. She'd gotten lucky with the first 2, both healthy, both surviving. But now she understands what other queens already know. Giving birth to a living child doesn't guarantee they'll stay alive. Pregnant again in 1535, another son, born prematurely, stillborn. Labor is difficult. Something tears during birth. Isabella hemorrhages. Physicians manage to stop the bleeding, but she never fully recovers. Weak for months, in chronic pain. Something is wrong internally. Damage from the birth that physicians can't see or fix. Charles is worried. He loves Isabella, doesn't want to lose her. But he also needs more children. The empire needs security. So even though Isabella's health is fragile, even though she's still recovering, she gets pregnant again in 1539. 36 years old. 6th pregnancy. Married 13 years. Already had 1 stillborn, 1 infant death, body damaged from a previous difficult labor. And this pregnancy is hard from the beginning. She's sick constantly, exhausted, in pain. Physicians shake their heads. This isn't good. She somehow carries to term. Goes into labor in April 1539. The labor is brutal. The baby won't come. Isabella's in agony, screaming, begging for it to stop. Midwives try everything, different positions, herbal drinks, prayers. Nothing works. The baby is stuck. After hours, the baby finally comes. Stillborn. Another son, dead before he took his first breath. And Isabella is hemorrhaging badly. Blood everywhere. Physicians can't stop it. They try packing the wound, try cauterizing, try bloodletting from her other arm, which is insane, but that's the level of medical knowledge. Nothing works. Isabella is dying, conscious enough to know it. She asks for a priest, receives last rites, says goodbye to Charles, who's weeping at her bedside. She's calm, ready. She's been a good wife, a good queen, done everything asked of her. If this is how it ends, so be it. Isabella of Portugal dies on May 1st, 1539. 35 years old, married to Charles for 13 years. 6 pregnancies, 2 living children, 3 dead babies. Dies bleeding out in her bed after giving birth to her 6th child, while her husband watches helplessly. Charles is shattered, completely destroyed. He never remarries, never even considers it, wears black mourning clothes for the rest of his life. When he eventually abdicates and retires to a monastery, he takes a portrait of Isabella with him, mourns her until he dies. The love was real. The grief is real. But Charles is also the one who kept getting her pregnant, who kept putting her through this because he needed heirs, needed dynasties, and that need overrode everything else, even love. Even when he could see each pregnancy was taking a toll on Isabella's health, he kept doing it because that's what kings did, what emperors did. They needed heirs, and if their wives died providing them, well, that was tragic. But it was also just part of the bargain. Isabella's story is particularly heartbreaking because she and Charles actually loved each other. This wasn't a cold political marriage. They were partners. And yet, even in a loving marriage, even when the king genuinely cared about his wife, the pressure to produce heirs overrode everything else. Isabella's body was still a political tool, still a vessel, and when it couldn't survive one more pregnancy, she died. Charles mourned her, but he'd also been complicit in her death because he'd kept getting her pregnant, kept pushing her body past its limits, kept prioritizing the dynasty over her life. Eleanor of Aquitaine is different from every other queen on this list, and not because she had an easier time. She didn't. 8 pregnancies in 13 years is brutal, no matter who you are. But Eleanor had something most queens didn't: power independent of her husband. She was Duchess of Aquitaine in her own right, controlling more land than the King of France. She had wealth, armies, political leverage, and she used all of it. Born around 1122, she inherits Aquitaine when she's 15, after her father and brother both die. One of the richest, most powerful women in Europe. Immediately, men start circling. Because whoever marries Eleanor doesn't just get a wife, they get Aquitaine. They get control of a huge chunk of what's now southern France, wealth and power and military might. Louis VI of France moves fast, marries Eleanor to his son within months of her father's death in 1137. She's 15, he's 17. The marriage is political, but Louis VII seems to genuinely care for her. Eleanor is smart, educated, politically savvy, expects to be treated as a partner, not just a broodmare. But she still needs to produce heirs, non-negotiable. Pregnant in 1145, she gives birth to a daughter, Marie. Not ideal. France wants a son, but fine, she'll try again. Pregnant in 1150, another daughter, Alix. 2 daughters, no sons. Pressure is building. France needs a male heir. Eleanor hasn't provided one. The marriage is also falling apart for other reasons. Louis is pious and rigid, wants Eleanor to act like a proper submissive wife. Eleanor is political and ambitious, wants to actually participate in governing. They're incompatible. They fight constantly. In 1152, the marriage is annulled. Official reason is consanguinity, too closely related. Real reason is no male heir, and both are miserable. Eleanor is 30. 2 pregnancies, 2 daughters, now divorced. But here's where Eleanor's story diverges. She doesn't disappear, doesn't retire to a convent, doesn't fade away. She remarries within months to Henry Plantagenet, Duke of Normandy. He's younger, she's 30, he's 19, but he's ambitious, energetic, brilliant. In 1154, he becomes King Henry II of England. Eleanor is now Queen of England, and this time pregnancies come fast. 8 children in 13 years. William in 1153, who dies at age 3. Henry in 1155. Matilda in 1156. Richard in 1157, future Richard the Lionheart. Geoffrey in 1158. Eleanor in 1161. Joanna in 1165. John in 1166, future King John. 8 births, 1 dead in childhood, 7 surviving to adulthood. And through all of this, Eleanor is politically active, not just lying around pregnant. She's ruling England while Henry's in France, negotiating treaties, managing rebellions, holding court, making decisions that affect the entire kingdom. She's not just a vessel, she's a power player. But 8 pregnancies in 13 years is still brutal. Eleanor is in her 30s and early 40s during these pregnancies. Each one takes a toll, each labor harder than the last, each recovery takes longer. By the time she gives birth to John in 1166, Eleanor is around 44 and her body is done. She doesn't get pregnant again. Whether that's by choice, by some form of early fertility control, or just because her body can't handle it, we don't know. Eleanor lives until 1204, 82 years old when she dies. She outlives most of her children. Henry the young king dies young. Richard dies in battle. Geoffrey dies in a tournament. She outlives Henry II. She lives through wars and rebellions and political upheavals. She's regent for Richard while he's on crusade, actively involved in governing England well into her 70s. Eleanor is the exception, the outlier, the queen who survived the breeding process and went on to rule in her own right. But even she wasn't immune to the physical toll. 8 pregnancies, decades of her life spent pregnant or recovering, 1 dead child in infancy, years of chronic health problems from constant strain. She just happened to be strong enough, lucky enough, politically savvy enough to survive it and maintain her power. Most queens didn't. Most queens went through what Eleanor went through and either died or lost all political relevance once their childbearing years were over. And here's something that should shock you. Eleanor of Aquitaine is the longest-lived queen on this entire list. 82 years old. She survived 8 pregnancies, decades of political warfare, imprisonment by her own husband, the deaths of most of her children. And she's still the one who made it the longest. That should tell you something about how dangerous it was to be a queen. Joanna of Castile's story is where everything falls apart in a different way. Born in 1479, daughter of Isabella I of Castile and Ferdinand II of Aragon, The famous Catholic monarchs who sponsored Columbus completed the Reconquista, established the Spanish Inquisition. Joanna grows up in a strict, intensely political household. In 1496, when she's 16, she's married off to Philip the Handsome of Burgundy. Marriage is political. Spain and Burgundy united through her womb. But Joanna falls desperately, obsessively in love with Philip. She's young, sheltered, suddenly married to a charismatic, handsome man who knows exactly how to manipulate her feelings. Philip is unfaithful from the beginning, openly, blatantly, flaunts his mistresses in front of Joanna. And Joanna, instead of accepting this as normal royal behavior the way most queens do, loses her mind with jealousy. She's violent, erratic, screaming at Philip one moment, begging him to love her the next. Her mental health is clearly deteriorating, but no one helps her. They just watch and whisper. And through all of this, Joanna keeps getting pregnant. 6 children in 9 years. Eleanor in 1498, Charles in 1500, future Charles V, Isabella in 1501, Ferdinand in 1503, Mary in 1505, Catherine in 1507. 6 pregnancies while her mental health is falling apart, 6 births while her husband is openly cheating, and everyone at court is treating her like she's insane. Constantly pregnant, constantly giving birth, constantly recovering, constantly being driven mad by Philip's behavior and her own inability to control her emotions. And then, in 1506, Philip dies suddenly, probably of typhoid, maybe poison, depending on which conspiracy theory you believe. Joanna is 27. 6 children, dead husband, spiraling mental health. Instead of being allowed to grieve, instead of being given support, she's declared insane. Her father, Ferdinand, takes control, claims she's unfit to rule. The stories get more exaggerated. She refuses to let Philip be buried, travels around with his coffin, opens it periodically to look at his decomposing body. Some of these stories are probably true. Some are definitely exaggerated or invented. But it doesn't matter. The narrative has been set. Joanna is mad. Joanna can't be trusted. Ferdinand locks her away in the royal convent of Santa Clara in Tordesillas. Almost no contact with the outside world. When Ferdinand dies, her son Charles takes over. Charles, the boy she gave birth to in 1500. Charles, who's now Charles V, Holy Roman Emperor. Charles, who keeps his mother imprisoned for his entire reign. Joanna spends 49 years locked in that convent. 49 years. From age 27 to 75, not allowed to leave, not allowed to participate in government, not allowed to see most of her children. Trapped, forgotten, erased. She dies in 1555 at 75. More than half her life imprisoned. Her body had been used to produce 6 children, to secure alliances, to continue dynasties. And once that purpose was fulfilled, once she'd done her duty, she was discarded. Her mental health struggles were real, but they were also weaponized, used as an excuse to strip her of power, to lock her away, to pretend she didn't exist. While Joanna rotted in that convent, her children went on to rule empires. Charles became the most powerful man in Europe. Her daughters married into royal families across the continent. The dynasty she'd built with her body thrived, and she was erased from it. Joanna's story shows the other side of royal breeding. It's not just the physical toll, it's what happens after. If you survive, if your body holds up, if you produce the heirs, then what? For most queens, the answer is nothing. You've done your job. You're no longer needed. And if you're difficult, if you're mentally ill, if you're inconvenient, you can be locked away, erased, treated like you never existed. Anne of Brittany is the final story, and it's the most heartbreaking, because Anne had everything except what mattered most. She was Duchess of Brittany in her own right, one of the wealthiest women in Europe, controlled vast territories, had her own armies, could have ruled independently. But instead, she was married off twice, used as a breeding tool, spent her entire adult life pregnant or mourning. Born in 1477, she inherits Brittany when she's 11 after her father dies. Immediately, she's valuable to every major power in Europe, because whoever marries Anne doesn't just get a wife, they get Brittany. Control of strategically crucial territory, wealth, and military power. France moves fast. King Charles VIII marries Anne in 1491 when she's 14. It's political. France wants Brittany. Anne's body is the key. The marriage contract is complicated. Anne will retain her title as Duchess, but if Charles dies before her, she's required to marry his successor to keep Brittany tied to France. Pregnant almost immediately, 15 years old, she gives birth to a son in 1492. Charles Orleans, healthy boy, heir to France. Everyone celebrates. Charles Orleans dies when he's 3, some childhood illness, sudden, devastating. 18 years old, and she's already buried her first child. But she keeps trying. Pregnant in 1493, stillborn son. Pregnant in 1495, another son who dies within hours. Pregnant in 1496, another son, Charles, who dies within weeks. Pregnant in 1498, another daughter, Anne, who dies at age 4. 5 pregnancies, 5 dead children. 21 years old, and she's buried every child she's given birth to. And then Charles VIII dies suddenly in 1498, hits his head on a low doorframe, has a seizure, dies within hours. Anne is a widow at 22. 5 dead children, dead husband, and because of the marriage contract, she has to marry Charles's successor, Louis XII. No choice. It's required. France still wants Brittany. Anne's body is still the key. So, in 1499, Anne marries Louis. 22 years old, already a widow, already 5 dead children behind her. Pregnant immediately, she gives birth to a daughter, Claude, in 1499. Finally a child who lives. Claude survives infancy, survives her first year, survives childhood. Anne finally has a living child. But she doesn't stop. Pregnant in 1500, stillborn son. Pregnant in 1503, another son, François, who dies within hours. Pregnant in 1510, another daughter, Renée, who survives. Married twice, pregnant at least 10 times, 8 dead children, 2 survivors. 36 years old, and her body is destroyed. Constant pregnancy for nearly 2 decades. Anne dies in 1514, only 36, from complications probably related to kidney stones or similar. But really, she died from exhaustion. From 15 years of constant pregnancy, from burying child after child after child, from the relentless physical and emotional toll. Anne of Brittany had power in her own right, was a duchess, controlled vast wealth and land, could have ruled independently. But instead, she was married off twice, her body turned into a political tool, spent her entire adult life pregnant or mourning. Her duchy was eventually absorbed by France. Her daughters inherited what she couldn't keep, and she died young, worn out, having buried 8 of her 10 children. And here's the detail that should haunt you. Anne of Brittany kept a book of hours, a prayer book. In the margins, she had artists draw symbols representing each of her pregnancies. 8 small coffins, 8 dead babies, 2 living daughters represented by flowers. She carried this book with her everywhere, a constant reminder of what her body had cost her. This is the reality of royal motherhood that no one talks about. It's not romance, not power, not fairy tales. It's a meat grinder that consumed women's bodies and lives and health and sanity, all in service of producing heirs. Queens were expected to get pregnant constantly, carry to term, give birth without proper medical care, recover quickly, and do it all over again. If they failed, if they miscarried, if they gave birth to daughters instead of sons, if they couldn't produce heirs, they were blamed, shamed, divorced, executed, erased. And if they succeeded, if they produced their heirs, secured the succession, did everything right, they often died anyway. From infection, from hemorrhage, from exhaustion, from bodies that simply couldn't take one more pregnancy. Let me be absolutely clear about what these numbers mean. Catherine of Aragon, at least 6 pregnancies in 9 years, 1 surviving daughter, divorced, exiled, dead at 50. Anne Boleyn, 4 pregnancies in 3 years, 1 surviving daughter, beheaded at 29. Jane Seymour, 1 pregnancy, 1 surviving son, dead at 28, 12 days after giving birth. Anne of Austria, multiple miscarriages over decades, finally 2 sons after 23 years of marriage. Maria Theresa of Spain, 6 pregnancies in 12 years, both daughters died at age 4, 1 surviving son, dead at 44 from exhaustion. Charlotte of Mecklenburg-Strelitz, 15 pregnancies in 21 years, husband wanted more even after the 15th. 13 surviving children, body destroyed, dead at 74. Isabella of Portugal, 6 pregnancies in 13 years, 2 surviving children, dead at 35 from hemorrhage during the 6th birth. Eleanor of Aquitaine, 8 pregnancies in 13 years, 7 surviving children, outlived most of them, died at 82, the longest-lived queen on this list. Joanna of Castile, 6 pregnancies in 9 years, 6 surviving children, imprisoned for 49 years by her own son. Anne of Brittany, at least 10 pregnancies in 15 years, kept a prayer book with 8 drawn coffins representing her dead babies, 2 surviving children, dead at 36. These women had wealth, had status, had access to the best medical care available, which admittedly wasn't much, and still they were destroyed by the expectation that their primary purpose was producing heirs. Their bodies weren't their own. Their health didn't matter. Their desires were irrelevant. They were vessels, tools, wombs with crowns. And this was considered normal, expected, the cost of being a queen. If you died in childbirth, well, that was tragic, but it was also just part of the job. If you spent decades pregnant and exhausted and grieving dead babies, that's what queens did. If your body broke down from constant strain, if you aged prematurely, if you died young, that was unfortunate. But it didn't change anything because the dynasty needed heirs. The succession needed to be secured. And queens were the ones who paid the price with their bodies, with their health, with their lives. There's no happy ending here, no triumphant conclusion. These women suffered. Their bodies were used up. Most of them didn't have a choice, couldn't say no, couldn't stop, couldn't protect themselves. They just endured until they couldn't anymore. So when you think about queens, when you picture crowns and thrones and power, remember this. Remember Catherine bleeding through pregnancy after pregnancy until Henry threw her away. Remember Anne Boleyn beheaded because her body couldn't produce a son. Remember Jane Seymour dying of infection 12 days after finally giving Henry what he wanted. Remember Anne of Austria suffering miscarriage after miscarriage for 23 years. Remember Maria Theresa watching both her daughters die at exactly age 4. Remember Charlotte, her husband wanting more children even after her body was destroyed by 15 pregnancies. Remember Isabella hemorrhaging to death while her husband, who loved her, watched helplessly. Remember Eleanor, the only one who survived to old age out of all of them. Remember Joanna imprisoned for 49 years after producing 6 children. Remember Anne of Brittany carrying a prayer book with 8 drawn coffins representing her dead babies. Remember that being a queen wasn't power, it was survival, and most of them didn't survive intact. Their bodies were battlegrounds, their wombs were political tools, their deaths were footnotes, and the dynasties they built with their blood and pain and sacrifice, those dynasties forgot them, erased them, reduced them to names and genealogies, mothers of kings, vessels who served their purpose and then disappeared. If you're still here, Night Owl, thank you for staying awake with me through this. If this changed the way you see royal history, if it made you angry, if it made you sad, if it made you look at those painted queens differently, tell me in the comments, which queen's story hit you the hardest? Had you heard any of this before, or was it all new beneath the fairy tale version? Drop your time and country again, so other people can see they're not alone sitting with this in the dark. If you want more episodes like this, more dynasties stripped down to the bone, more stories where we follow the blood instead of the pretty costumes, like this video, subscribe to The Dark Scrolls, and ring the bell so you don't miss the next chapter. Sleep well, or don't. Sometimes the truth is too brutal to let you rest easy. But remember this, they weren't just names. They weren't just wombs. They were women, and they deserved better than they got. Thanks for watching. Subscribe for more.